Hey everyone, Brendan Snyder here. How are you? Thanks so much for joining me and welcome to 5 horrible albums that aren't that bad. So I like change as much as the next fan. I enjoy when my favorite bands experiment, but sometimes it goes too far and it creates some horrible albums and otherwise very, very good music catalogs. And so while some of these albums are often seen as the worst by that particular band, these albums are not always as bad as they're made out to be, and in their own right can actually be good albums on their own if we look at them outside of the catalog of these amazing bands. So join me as I run through 5 horrible albums that aren't that bad. And so we're going to dive into that here in just a bit. But before we get started, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do. Also leave a comment, hit like. All those things do help support my channel. I'd greatly appreciate it. And of course, as an added bonus, by turning on notifications, you'll never miss an episode and stay up to date on really cool things like this with 5 horrible albums that aren't that bad. And so we're going to dive in with, this is by no means a ranking here, but with maybe the biggest misstep that a band ever made in all of music. And I could be wrong, but I just know this band, as a mega big as they are, doing what they did here and then it not going over like gangbusters. I think that's the part that is where it makes this maybe the biggest misstep. Have you figured out which one I'm talking about yet? Thrash metal legends, Metallica, Saint Anger. This one coming out in 2003. It was their 8th studio album. First time without bassist Jason Newsted since 1988. So that was a big shakeup in and of itself. I do not think that is what changed the sound, but you've already got that one strike against this album. But the thing is, they made a complete about face with this one. It is not the sound and style of previous albums. It's not the sound and style of their 80s era thrash, which is really what everybody had wanted post Black Album. They kind of accepted that, but they really would have wanted the band to return. And it's not even their hard rock leaning style sounds of the 90s. This is completely different than that, removing guitar solos, changing the drum sound, making the songs long with and sort of syncopated and rhythmic, and just everything very, very different about this album. But as a whole, I have to say, it is not a bad album. Case in point to prove that is this album has sold 2 million copies in the US alone. A lot of that, simply the name. But I could imagine the album going gold if it was just that. But it actually has sold 2 million copies. I think that in a way, the album on its own is a good, solid album. I do think it is in heavy need of a lot of editing. The songs run on too long. If you're not going to have solos and leads and things like that in it, it should have been cut back. It definitely needs a remix in there. That horrible clanky drum sound that sounds like trash cans in there. I don't know. You could have done it on a few songs, but doing it on the entire album was really questionable in my opinion. But like I said, it is an album that I go back to all the time, trying to really get into. And I have to say, it's really one of those things that after the first 3 songs, which are the ones that were the singles released from this thing, Frantic, Saint Anger, Some Kind of Monster, after that, starting with Dirty Window, Invisible Kid, My World, Shoot Me Again, all of that, I think the album gets better and better and better by the end. And so for me a lot, I just skip those first 3 songs and I listen to this thing. And like I said, on its own, it's not a bad album. It's actually pretty good. But the fact that it's under Metallica's name is where the problem lies in this. And they wanted to reinvent themselves, and they did, and they stood by it, sounding that way for the entire tour until they finally came back with Death Magnetic, restoring their sound. But I don't think the experiment worked. I think they're just stubborn, sticking by it. And when it rolls around to do a deluxe edition box set of Saint Anger, I don't believe they will do the remix. I don't believe we are going to see anything of that. They've never once admitted that they made a mistake with it. So it is what it is. This album is going to live in infamy, I think, but I don't think it's quite as bad as everyone makes it out to be. It's just not one of the ones that I go back to all that often, because when I think of Metallica, I don't think of this. All right. Another album that I think really caught people off guard is a big change in style and sound. And it's not that bad of an album, but when you want something from this artist, it's not the album you're going to be grabbing for. And I'm talking about Motley Crue, Generation Swine from 1997, their seventh studio album. Yes, it is upside down, but they do that on purpose. This was the first new album together, though, the four guys reuniting on this one since Dr. Feelgood in '89. Everybody wanted Dr. Feelgood. Granted, it's 1997. We all knew we weren't going to get Dr. Feelgood, but I don't think people realized how sort of grunge sounding, industrial, drum looped, I don't know, dirgy sounding stylings of this album. It was really not at all what I was expecting from the band. It just, for me, lacks identity, lacks focus, and they completely underuse the sound of Mick Mars, which I think has been a defining element of the band, despite no one in Motley Crue wanting to admit that, having now brought in John 5, which doesn't bring anything of that classic blues rock sound that Mars has. But this is where it began to get lost in. And so the other big thing about this album that I think is a huge misstep in terms of Motley Crue was that they allowed someone other than Vince Neil to be singing. On a reunion album, it should have just been Vince. If others had sung in the past, okay, but Nikki and Tommy both taking lead, and neither of them have a strong singing voice, so it was absolutely questionable, in my opinion, that that happened. But we all know the story. Everyone's walking on eggshells. Everyone wants to make everyone else happy. And so everyone is letting everyone else do whatever they want, and you get a very unfocused album. That said, there's still some very strong elements to this. The modernized approach that they took for this album for a sound in 1997 absolutely worked on first single, Afraid. I loved that. I thought it was great. If we could have had more of that on the album, I would have liked it. But the song Beauty and Glitter, those all three are the singles from the album, and they all worked to good effect. The problem is, I don't feel there was anything else on the album as strong as those three songs. Maybe the title track, Generation Swine, but really, in my opinion, nothing else. It's very forgettable. It doesn't lack any sort of memorable aspect that makes me want to go back or think about it. And so, unfortunately, the album doesn't do a whole lot in the end of the day for that Motley Crue sound. But in its own right, does it work? I do think it works. It works as a 1997 era album. If these guys had come out under a different name, I think it would have done even better. The album, on name alone, I think is what made the album go gold. I don't really think that the singles or anything else off of. In fact, I remember seeing the song Afraid played a lot on MTV, or maybe it was VH1 by that point, but never saw a video for Beauty or Glitter. I just know they were released as singles. In fact, Glitter was later done as a remix for the greatest hits, just telling you how much this didn't work. But like I said, at the time, I enjoyed it for what it was, but was hugely disappointed for it in terms of Motley Crue. So it doesn't make it a bad album. It just makes it a bad Motley Crue album. But if you can wipe away those expectations of wanting Dr. Feelgood, Girls, 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 Theater of Pain, just any of that old school stuff, it's a pretty good album, in my opinion, for 1997. All right, so this next one here, I definitely think most fans would say is the worst in their catalog, but maybe not as big a misstep as the two that we just talked about there. Though I did want to bring this one in. Tesla, Shock, 2019, 11th studio album, and at this point, latest full-length album. 6 years on, we still haven't gotten anything new to replace it, and I'm really hoping that this one here is not the final Tesla album. They're young enough. I think we're going to get some more stuff, but they keep saying they don't want to make albums anymore. They're simply not interested in it. And a lot of it has to do with this. They put their heart and soul into it, and it didn't do what they hoped that it would. And a lot of fans turned their nose up at it. My biggest complaint is this. It doesn't sound like Tesla. It is produced and co-written by Phil Collen of Def Leppard. So as you might imagine, songs are co-written, production it's going to sound like Def Leppard. So basically imagine if Jeff Keith, the frontman of Tesla, joined Def Leppard, that's what this is. Or imagine if Phil Collins joined Tesla because he plays on the whole album as well. So either way, you have a Tesla Def Leppard merged album. And Tesla had their own distinct sound. It was a classic blues hard rock sound out of the 70s, modernized for the 80s, a little bit of glam metal thrown in on it. And they were distinct. They did not sound like any of their peers from the 80s and early 90s when they were doing their thing. And so to go and change it really is questionable in my opinion. Why did they do it? Title says it all. It really did shock fans. But if you listen to it and you like Def Leppard, it's a fantastic album. I'm a big fan of Phil Collins. He's done some outside projects, Man Ray being one of them, made 2 albums that have a sort of punk vibe sounding like Def Leppard. He was in a band called Girl, same sort of thing. So this, if I listen to this when I'm in the mood for Def Leppard and I'm enjoying Phil Collins, it's great. It is a fantastic album. It just doesn't sound anything like Tesla. And so you have to wipe away those ideas of wanting Tesla style sound or 70s hard rock vibe, because instead you're going to get 80s, 1987 really hysteria era vibes from this played present day. So funny thing is, this almost has more of a Def Leppard feel to it than Def Leppard has on their last couple albums, even though they've slowly been returning towards a more classic 80s era style sound for the band. I don't think they'll ever get back to 100% sounding like Pyromania or Hysteria. They've gotten fairly close to it, but this here fitting right in with it. So maybe a bad album for Tesla, but not a bad album at all. In fact, it's really strong in terms of the songs that are on here. All right, this next one here, really the same case. The band having an absolute distinct sound, and they almost did not use any of it on this. Queen plus Paul Rodgers recording The Cosmos Rocks, coming out in 2008. 16th studio album by Queen, but obviously first under the name of Queen plus Paul Rodgers. So when this came out, it had been 23 years since the last Queen album, Made in Heaven, which came out in 1995, being a posthumous album. So even completed after Freddie Mercury had passed away, meaning it had been longer since we had gotten one when the band was actually still active as a band. So this one being the first one without Freddie Mercury, having a new vocalist come in. I like that they did it as Queen plus Paul Rodgers, but this really should have been called a Paul Rodgers plus Queen album, because Queen is really backing up Paul Rodgers. So take all of the blues, hard rock sounds of Free and Bad Company, Paul Rodgers' original 2 bands, and imagine Queen embellishing it a little bit here, a little bit there. But Brian May, the guitar player of Queen, really has such a distinct style sound. Anytime he goes in and plays a lead guitar solo for some other artist, you immediately know that it is Brian May of Queen. And the funny thing is, that doesn't happen on here. You get a few lead fills here or there, but really, this does not have any of that distinct layered up sound that is Queen, that we know and love for the band. So I was hugely disappointed with this, and it's another one that I go back to time and time again, but it doesn't sound like Queen. The thing is, it's not a bad album. It is a fantastic Paul Rodgers solo album with Queen backing him up. And so when I'm in the mood for Bad Company, Free, Paul Rodgers, I'll go listen to it. When I'm in the mood for Queen, though, I don't go for it. And so I can imagine how most people would slot this in the last position in a Queen album ranking countdown because of that. But again, it doesn't make it a bad album. There's a lot of really good stuff on this album. It just has a different vibe to it than Queen does. It has the Paul Rodgers or the Bad Company vibe, which makes it a good album in and of its own right. All right. This last one, I don't think I've ever actually talked about on the channel. I could be wrong. I have done these other ones that are hated albums and stuff like that. And of course, I always do a little tongue in cheek because, like this one, I'm saying they're horrible albums, but they're still good in their own right. This one is one that I've often thought about, never talked about. So you're getting a new one here from me. Boston, Corporate America from 2002, fifth studio album from the group. This was the first to feature a new member, Kimberly Dane. Now, original vocalist Brad Delp is involved in the album, but he's not the sole lead vocalist like many of us would have wanted. He only sings 4 out of the 10 songs that are on here. The album itself as a whole has a very piecemeal vibe to it. And if you understand Tom Scholz, that seems odd because he is all about the perfectionism of things. And so for it to be an album that bunch of different singers. He brings in Kimberly Dane, and he actually has her sing lead on one of the songs, and it was her song that she brought. So it's not a co-write, and it's not produced or sounding anything like Boston material. It just really stands out like a sore thumb. And that song is called With You on here. And so that one is just an oddity in my opinion. But the song Stare Out Your Window on here sounds like a late 90s alternative rock song while having a little bit of the Boston production. So you do feel Boston, but it just doesn't flow like a Boston song. You have Cryin', which is another acoustic style song on here, but yet has that 90s alternative rock flair to it. And then Livin' For You, a live version of a song that was on their previous album, Walk On from 1994. So why do you put on a song that you've already done, put a live version at that, which is not as superior as the original? Again, questionable. So for me, 4 questionable songs on this that don't really have the flair and the feel of the Boston style and sound and everything on it, or the perfectionism and level of everything that we normally get from Tom Scholz, the front runner, the guitar player of the group. The thing is, there's still really a lot of good stuff on this album. But what's interesting is the title track, Corporate America, was actually put out under a different band name, Downers Revenge. And it got picked up by radio, it got played, and it got a lot of attention until people found out that it was simply Boston. Now, the thing is, it shocked a lot of people. And that's actually what led to the band getting signed by Artemis Records and doing the album and everything, sort of saying, look, we put this out. You guys loved it when you thought it wasn't Boston. So please give Boston a chance because we are that same band that put that song out that you liked. It kind of worked and it didn't work. It did create a little bit of buzz for the band, but at the same time, might have said that they should have put it out under the name Downers Revenge because they were getting sweeping radio play on the song Corporate America. Yeah, it sounds like a Boston song, but people thought it was a new band doing a new thing because, memories are so short, I guess. Still, there's a lot of stuff on here that is good like that song. What's crazy though is 4 of the songs that are good songs on here would later turn up on their next and currently latest album, this one here, Life, Love, and Hope, which came out in 2013. So pulling 4 songs, I Had a Good Time, Someone, Didn't Mean to Fall in Love, and You Gave Up on Love, all to make this album says this one here is still a pretty good album. And so if you do like this album, because yes, everything on here returned to the classic Boston sound, albeit not as good as the original stuff because they're using electronic drums and other synthesized things on here. And we even get some of that on this. I like it when Boston is a full 4 or 5 piece band producing this stuff instead of having drum machines and samples. But that was starting to creep in on this. And like I said, on its own, it's a good album, but under the name Boston leaves a lot to be desired. So really, for all these albums that I've talked about here today on this, they might be horrible albums for those artists in their catalogs and often be considered the worst when we do album rankings for them. But these albums from these bands are still really good albums, and I would highly recommend exploring them. You just have to remove and distance the band name from these when you listen to them, and just listen to it. Turn off the lights, or do it late at night or something, and lay down, not thinking about anything, and just give these albums a go. And I think that you will hear that on their own, they're good albums. So there you go. 5 horrible albums that aren't that bad, at least in my opinion. I'm sure you know some other albums that people continue to pan over and over that are often the last and worst ranked in an album ranking that aren't that bad. One for me that comes to mind is AC/DC's Fly on the Wall. I absolutely love it. I rank it considerably high. But because you know I rank it high, I didn't want to include it here. It's just that other people often consider it to be the worst AC/DC album. So if you know of other ones like that, leave those in the comments. Let's have a great conversation about it. And, we'll see where this goes from here. But these are always fun when talking about albums that people generally hate, but then other people sometimes really love. All right, everyone. Take care. Have a good one. And I'll talk to you real soon. Bye-bye.